appreciate the claps, but good afternoon. This is an interactive sort of thing. Hello. Good afternoon. A little much better. So I believe that I'm probably the person standing in between your brain and the carbohydrates you just ate. So I'm going to do my best to sort of, get us working, get us into this. So my name is David Blank-Edelman. I am, strangely enough, an employee of Microsoft, which seems very strange. And I want to talk to you a little bit about site reliability engineering today. So here's the question. How many people like rings in the mic? No. How many people, are we almost there? I can switch the mics if you want. Okay. Anyway, so let's do a quick poll for me. How many people here kind of sort of know what SRE is, site reliability engineering is? Wow. Okay, that's excellent. How many people here consider themselves or have on their business card the title SRE? Okay, so good. So the 4 of you, roughly, if you would be so kind as to check me in on what I'm going to say during the parts that you already know, and then come up afterwards and tell me what I got right and what I got wrong, that would be really good. So in order to level set the room, because everybody's heard a little bit about it, some people do it, but not everybody is that, I want to sort of give you my ideas around SRE. And we're going to do a quick SRE 101, if that's okay with you. Yes? Good? Okay. Who can tell me what this is, please? Yeah. Can you raise your hand? That's very funny. I haven't heard that before. Say again? My finger? Is that the John Cage when you point at the moon, be sure to look at the moon and not your finger? Is that what you're quoting? No? So what do we think this is? Another one. So, okay, I'll help. This is what happens when a PHP program errors out. Okay? And if it helps you at all, I'll show you this. I didn't want it come, this typically showing people Java stack traces cause them to twitch. I'm not going to show you a Python stack trace because, you see it up plenty of times. So let's go back to the PHP example if we might. The reason why I'm showing you what happens when a PHP program or application errors out is I want to talk a little bit about the importance of reliability. And my contention is this. You can have the most featureful app. You can spend lots and lots and lots of time adding features, doing user research, coming up with personas, have an entire org that all it does is build features and that sort of stuff. But if it isn't up, it doesn't do you a bit of good. Right? That's why site reliability engineering focuses on primarily reliability as a major portion of what's important in a system. Okay? So that's why we're going to be talking about reliability today specifically. The other thing that I think that's also useful to know is that site reliability engineering attempts to do that interesting little tug of war you get when you have these set of people on this side whose job it is to write features, to add stuff to the software, to be developers, to keep on changing things for the better. Right? It's a good thing to do. It's a conference about it, right? Like, it's an important thing to do. And yet you have people on this side over here whose job it is to keep things up and as stable as possible. And up and stable as possible is kind of in conflict with that notion of those people over there who are trying to change things all the time. All this is correct. So this is the tug of war that it's trying to address to a certain extent. I feel compelled whenever I talk about SRE to make it clear that SRE is not the next evolutionary step from something else. It is not the case that, like, once upon a time, we were barely standing upright and doing system administration, and then now we've all become DevOps, right? And that was an evolutionary step. And now I'm here to tell you that SRE is not the next step evolutionary from DevOps. Please do not believe that. Yeah, I know, sorry. Yeah, well, so now's your time. Now you should split because I'm going to disappoint you all throughout this talk. The thing I think that is useful to understand for me when I think about how does DevOps and, say, SRE compare is these were two different parallel streams going on at the same time attempting to solve similar problems. That previous slide, that was a tug of war. Similar problems. One set of people decided to go do it in a particular way. Other sets of people, including those people sort of in the land of Google and elsewhere, decided to treat it as a different problem. So I think that's kind of really important to understand that I'm not trying to say like all of you should now flip your titles, especially the people who are not SREs in the room, to become SREs. It's not what I think. So if you're up for that, let's go. Ready? Yep. Okay. So here's what I want to say a little bit about reliability and site reliability engineering that's key to understand. Site reliability engineering is an engineering discipline whose focus is trying to allow you to have the appropriate amount of reliability in the software, services, programs, products, whatever you want to call them, the appropriate level of activity of reliability. Notice that they didn't say 100% reliability. Because while there are things for which 100% reliability is an important thing, those things that fly in the air, you know, and the things that go in your chest, those should be reliable. 100%, all down for that. But most of the things that we run, most of the software that we write, most of the services that we're in charge of don't have to be up 100% of the time. And once you can take that information in and can understand that we're talking about appropriate levels, then you can try to say, well, what is an appropriate level for my service? And I'm going to use, and we'll give you an example of this in a moment. But just for fun, let's use a service and let's pretend it's OK that it's up 80% of the time. I know this is like a tiny amount of nines, like can't even see a 9 in there, but just so we can think about it, right? Can we all agree that there's, 20? We agree that it has to be up 80% of the time, and the other 20% of the time during downtimes, maintenance, other stuff like that. That's fine, right? So we're going to use that as a sample example in a sec. So the way I like to begin to talk about SRE and to show people what SRE is comes from a talk that was given at the very first inaugural, I'm not going to be able to say it today, meeting of a conference called SRECon, and just to admit to it, I'm one of the co-founders. I love it a lot. But the very first talk that was given at this conference was by this gentleman right here, Ben Traynor, now Ben Traynor-Sloss, in which he tried to, since he was the one who coined the name and started it at Google, tried to define what is SRE to him. And I like to start this way. This is a talk that you can go watch online. If you're getting into this sort of stuff, I kind of recommend it as a great place to start, even more than any other source. So I ripped off his slide by, say, dramatic recreation. You don't have to read this all now. We'll go through it together. Because he didn't give me the slide, I just copied it from the video. But that's artistic license. So let's walk through this slide a little bit. So one of the things that I think that's interesting, as some of his things was first, you suggest having an SLA, having a service level agreement for your service. We will talk a little about the word SLA a little bit later. Then what you want to do is measure the performance and how well it's doing against that SLA. And then finally, you want to use this thing called error budgets to gate launches on them. Okay? So let's talk a little bit about what error budgets are, because to a certain extent, the way to think about them helps you get a good insight into the way SREs think. Okay, so let's say we've got a service. And what we want to do is the first thing we want to do is we want to sit down with the people that are writing the service, and maybe that's you, and maybe it's not, and say, what is the objective for your service? How much do you expect it to be up? Right, that discussion we just had a moment ago? And typically you frame them in terms of service level indicators. I expect it to have this much latency. I expect it to return no more than this many errors, an hour. I expect things about durability. I expect all these things. So I have a bunch of service level indicators that we all agree are how we're going to judge what it means to be up. Because there's lots of ways you can judge whether a service or something is up. It could be the number of errors, stuff like that. So you have an SLO. You come up with this, you sit down, and the key thing that I just said to you is that you work with the people that write the software. It's not one of these situations where someone says, hey, I wrote a bunch of software, and then they stick it in a hollow tree stump, and they scurry away, and it's your job in the operations group to take it out of the tree stump and go, oh, I see. This is how I know this is up. It's working with that sort of teams. Okay. So once you've got that SLO, the next thing you do is you take that service level objective and you embody it in your monitoring system, which I presume you have. If you don't have, get first. This is a suggestion. You take and you put this in your monitoring system, whatever it is, the thing that you've agreed on. And we're going to call this monitoring system, whatever that monitoring system is, whatever it is you're running. We're going to call that a source of truth that I can look at as an operations person, that you can look at as a service owner or a developer for the service. And we have that monitoring, and we both watch it. right? We launch the service and we watch the monitoring system. Then when it comes time to figure out whether or not we're going to rev that system, whether we're going to upgrade it, we look at the system and we see, okay, well, how much has this thing been up? Has this been, so let's go back to the 80% service thing. Has this thing been up for 90% of the time? Well, if it is, awesome. I have some room to play. I can launch as many different versions of this as I want. I have the opportunity to upgrade it, to change it. But if the thing's been up for like 60% of the time, then you want to at least stop and think. Some places actually stop and don't allow the release to go forward, and decide whether or not it's okay to release it, because what's going on with that? If you have that opportunity to do this, then you can go back and say, well, okay, so why is it falling over so often? What do I need to do to fix it? Like, you might change from looking at features for just a little bit about operability or reliability. Why is my thing so unreliable? That might be something you might do if you decide this. So the error budget idea is very simple. It says, if I've got a service that has to be up 80% of the time, I have an error budget of 20%. This is my budget of unreliability that I'm willing to spend, right? Like any other budget in the world. That's the idea behind error budgets. The nice thing about error budgets, and what I put up on this slide, is all the people in the organization, ideally, are working from data. They're working at an objective set of data that's in monitoring. Everybody agrees. Everybody looks at it. It's not an argument that says, I don't know, feels like a good day to launch a new version, right? It's not, or my version has to be out. I've been reliable, really I have. No, you just look, you know. So it's a way of communicating. To me, it's a way of getting people into a room and having a productive conversation based on data in a way that people agree to. Because once you've got people agreeing to this, it's good stuff. Okay, so another thing that's interesting about Ben Trader's things is he suggests that there should be a common staffing pool for SRE and dev, which they call squeeze. I don't know why you put dev down, but the software engineers and the SREs should all be able to engineer in the same way. They all should be able to read code. They should all be able to write code. They should all be able to check in code and stuff like that. And people within Google switch back and forth on tracks if they want to. They're just two different tracks, and you can go between SRE and SWE if you want to. So that's an interesting fact. I don't know if that's true for everybody, but that's the way they think about it. And here's the other thing: is they also suggest that if, in fact, you give me a service and we're working a service and it has too high of an operational load, then some of that operational load, some of those tickets should fall back onto the dev team. Or another way to say it is, if I get woken up, if like I'm not the operations person isn't the only person that gets woken up at 2 a.m. Because you will find that if you do this awesome thing and hand back the pager to a developer, the first or the second time they're woken up at 2 a.m. is the last time that bug appears in production. Right? It's just a thing that you found, right? And the other thing they also suggest is if you spend all your time doing operational stuff and you don't spend any time doing project work to improve the reliability of your service, then you're always fighting a fire and you're going to burn out. So that's why they cap the operation load there. So the thing that I like about SRE is that they like to create these virtuous loops that get better and better. This error budget thing, right? We're all working towards the same goal, and we're working together, and we're getting better along these lines. So another example of that is this that showed up that also shows up other places, which is the notion of doing a post-mortem, right? But a post-mortem that is, for every significant event is what I think he really meant. Post-mortems that are blameless and they focus on process and technology and not people. I.e., this was a problem. How did it happen? Not it's Bob's or Susan's fault, but what was it that allowed Susan or Bob or Pat to push the wrong button? Why is that button available? Why could that be easy? What is wrong with our process? Where was the documentation that should have said something about that? It's focusing on that and not the people. Because here's a little thing that you really got to understand. You cannot fire your way to reliable. It isn't the case that if, in fact, every time there's an outage, you fire somebody, your system becomes more reliable. It just doesn't happen that way, right? What you do wind up is you get one person sitting in the corner with a cigarette doing this, who's afraid to do anything, right? You don't get to reliable by firing people, right? You get to it by doing that sort of introspective postmortem stuff. Okay, congratulations, that's SRE 101. Everybody, see me for your certificate later, and then you can go off and I don't know what. Okay, so people ask often, which is kind of a core of this talk, like, where do I start? This stuff sounds cool. I like this idea. I want to learn about this. Well, lots of people start with this really cool book, Site Reliability Engineering, put out by Google. It's a little thin on plot and character development, but I think it's a really good book. I encourage you to get it. I think it's really quite good, and it's a good description of what Google does, or did. Okay? When they realized that one of the problems with that was it's cool to know that, but it's even better to know why they do that. They just recently published, very, very recently in July, the Site Reliability Workbook, also a lovely book. And again, in full disclosure, my name, both of these books, I have something in there that says, this is a great book, because I think it's a great book. But this leaves you to wonder this question about, like, is SRE just Google? And I don't think it necessarily is. Obviously not. I work for a company that's not Google. I have a hand in something, sorry to push my own book, that is coming out. I just handed them the final proof yesterday, I think. Like really, yesterday, and I'm not making that up. It's coming out that attempts to do a little bit of describing, like, how does SRE implemented in other places besides Google? What do you need to know as an SRE to make your life easier? What about the human side of SRE, which I think we really, really have to pay attention to. So anyway, it's, wait for the movie. That's what I recommend, but it's not a bad book coming out. It'll be out soon. The other thing that I also suggest, and again, I told you I started, so I have something in this, is these are phenomenal conferences. We now have the conferences on different, and they tend to sell out. Almost every single one of them has sold out on every continent. The reason why that one's lit up is that's the next one. The next one's in Dusseldorf. Does anybody here want to come to Dusseldorf with me? Because I'll be there. It's good. I've never been there, never been to Germany. If you know any things to do in Germany when I get there, let me know. So it's kind of cool. So how do I start? The first thing is I recommend you start with a problem, or maybe you have an epiphany, or you have a downtime, and you're like, okay, crap, we can't keep on doing it this way. It's often a good place to start. Not that you like that, but that's what happens. Okay? Once you do that, it's kind of important to get management support lined up, and we'll talk about that says, hey, we want to go try this thing. What do you think? Will you support us in things with like error budgets? I recommend reading all the books, including the one I wrote, really critically. Not everything in it is going to apply to you. Not everything in it even applies to Google anymore. Just read them critically. Look at them from that aspect. What is useful for me? Don't cargo coat. Don't say, if only I could like add more vowels to my name of my company, I would be able to operate better, right? Do the right thing. Look carefully at these things. I recommend hanging out with other people who are SREs or getting into the SRE thing, talking to people. So important to have these conversations. And then if you're up for it, start dipping your toe into the SLO and error budget thing. Set up, find a service. Any service doesn't have to be important. Start coming up with service level objectives. Come up with service level indicators. Make some objectives. Put them in your monitoring. See what happens. See what just to see how it feels. It's like that way of deciding, where you flip a coin and you do this, and before you look at it and you go, oh, tails, right? And you just do that internal check of like, how do you feel when you actually look at the answer? Like, do that with this stuff. See what it would be like. See how well you get close to your stuff like that. Okay, so that's the how to do it personally. I promised that I would talk about how to bring this stuff into your organization, which is a different sort of thing. And to do that, I'm going to talk a little bit briefly about 3 different implementations, just so you understand that there's different ways to do it, this sort of stuff. So the Google model looks like this. There's a centralized ladder. All the SREs live on the same management ladder, and basically they partner with development teams. With some geodiversity, so like they have peer teams. Dublin and New York happens a lot. Dublin and Mountain View also happens. Sydney, stuff like that. They are considered a scare resource. No, that was scarce. I didn't notice that. Could be a scare resource. By that I mean not everybody gets an SRE. You have to be at a certain maturity level of your service before they're willing to consider giving you an SRE from that pool, whether you like it or not. In many cases, that's why I said you must be mature enough. Like it is the case that once you prove that your service that you have built is at a level where SRE can be helpful, then an SRE can help. They're very keen on the certain sizes because they want to talk about on-call rotations. They're very cool about making sure that people have aren't burnt out by on-call. And see all the stuff about the stuff that we were talking about. We did that stuff like that. But you might ask yourself, what about not Google? Which is, to me, the more interesting question because it's less talked about. So There are lots of places. There are probably people on the lists on this. There are probably SREs in the room who are not on this list. Yes? Oh yeah, you're there. The nice thing about Twitter is they're really observant. I love them dearly. I don't love all the people on Twitter, but I love Twitter dearly. So we're going to talk about Facebook, because Facebook's an interesting model. And because there's no way in hell I was going to get their comms people to let me use their official logo, there's my best bet. So there you go. OK, so Facebook has what they call production engineers. And if you want to learn about production engineering, there is the second time we did SRECon. Pedro came and spoke. He's the guy that leads production engineering out there. And so here's the way they describe it. I'm going to read this big blob of text to you. Production engineers at Facebook are hybrid software systems engineers who ensure that Facebook's services run smoothly and have the capacity for future growth. They are embedded in every one of Facebook's product and infrastructure teams and are core participants in every significant engineering effort underway in the company. OK, what's the most important word on this slide? Good. This is good. Eventually, we'll get there. Like if enough. OK, raise your hand. Let me just pick one person. Engineers. No. Yes. Cookie to this person. OK. The thing to understand about Facebook that's kind of interesting is that they put their SREs into their teams. They sit with the teams specifically. There is one management org, but it is the case that you are embedded in the team. Specifically, there's about a 1-to-10 ratio of devs to Ps, ideally in a team. They have 18, 24, 36-month rotations with a service. They're not considered a SWAT team. They're certainly not ops monkeys. It's not like, oh, goody, we get a production engineer. Let's give that person all the tickets. Like, that doesn't happen. They're there to help that org. They also all now go through boot camp, which is that famous onboarding thing that they do. And here's the other thing that's kind of interesting. Pedro reports to the head of engineering. Okay, and it is the case that that production engineering comes into the tree such that the people that are responsible for keeping things running and the people that make the stuff, all report into the same person, versus going up the arrow and hitting and coming in at like the CEO or something. Right? And what this means is that one person can very early on make the decisions between these sort of things versus it being this turf fight between the people that are trying to build stuff and the people who are trying to keep it running. And he says this is like crucial to the way he does things. And so I just want to say this is important for a lot of reasons. Oh yeah, look, I even read that's how important it is. Okay, because the thing that you got to understand is that in order to do SRE, in my experience, unless you're doing skunkworks SRE, which you can do, is to have management support. You need someone who's willing to give you the no, who's willing to back you up, who's willing to be part of this effort. Okay, so one more. Sorry, not Twitter. I don't know as much about Twitter. Let's go talk about this afterwards, okay? Let's go grab a coffee and talk about this. Okay, so let's talk about Spotify, the people that make the music coming to streaming to you. So Spotify is kind of interesting because the entirety of the Spotify organization is based very strongly, and I don't know if this is a Scandinavian thing per se, on this decentralized autonomy model. Right? They're like agile gun amok in terms of having tribes and having all these sorts of things. So there's a decentralized. They have squads, they have tribes, but it's really decentralized. Everything in Spotify is super decentralized, which is kind of interesting. Though there is an infra tribe called IO, in case you're curious, that handles the infrastructure, and most people use their stuff, but you don't have to in Spotify. You don't have to use the central IO stuff. You can go off and use whatever you want. And in fact, IO has to convince you that you should go use their stuff, which is kind of interesting. There's no SRE org. There are working groups across the company that do stuff, but they don't have anything they call SRE. That's an organization. You can't go, let me go to the SRE meeting. It doesn't exist. So they have what they call ops in squads, which sounds either good or bad, depending on the way you look at it. And that's the notion that the operations people are also embedded in a way, but embedded in a way that is even more decentralized than we were talking about at Facebook. The other thing that they have is something called a golden path, which I know sounds a little culty, but it's not. It's basically, it says, here's the deal. We get that you can do anything you want here, and you can set up any infrastructure you want. Here is the one we know works. Here is the list. You want to get a service in production? Let me tell you what we know works. This, 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 this. You use our stuff, it'll work. That's what the golden path is. And mostly it works. So the thing I want to say, probably close to my last observation about this, is that there's no one right way to do SRE in a company. There are lots and lots and lots of wrong ways to do SRE. And if you want to ask me during questions and answers, I'm happy to go into that sort of stuff. But there's no one right way to do it, in my opinion. So with that, what I'm going to do, and I think my timing is pretty good here. With that, what I'm going to do is I just want to give you sort of like a little bit of a look into like SRE, what it is, how you might think about doing it yourself, how you might bring it into your organization, what it might do for you along these lines, and I hope I've succeeded in doing that. If you have questions, I would be glad to take them now. How much time do we have for questions? Like 4 minutes? Is it a half an hour? It's a half an hour. 12 minutes. We have 12 minutes. Wow, that's awesome. Then we can have a really good principled discussion. Does anybody have any questions? Like, do you want to know why Fred ordered the large ribs? Did he know if the car was going to tip over? Sorry, some people know the Flintstones. Anyway, sorry. Why do birds suddenly appear every time I'm near? So the mic's not on, but I think you said that Twitter's known for its customer obsession. No, I know, I'm just messing with these guys. I'm sorry. I know. Seriously, ain't that the truth?
So Amazon is known for their obsession with customer satisfaction. And
yeah.
Amazon.com, on Prime Day, they had their website down. So what's your take on that? And what does it mean for SRE going forward?
Okay, so I'm going to say several different things. You said Amazon and customer obsession. So how does customer obsession and SRE come together is the first part I'm going to take. The second part is, what about the fact that I myself were going refresh on Prime Day? Okay, I'll gladly talk about that. So I think the thing so what's interesting is Amazon is super secret about SRE stuff in it. Like knowing what there's nobody with, so I talked to them about this at an event, and they said there's nobody with the SRE title in our org. They're just other engineers who pay attention to operations. Yes, there's like security people, yes, there's some infra people, but they don't have anything called SRE. They just consider it engineering. Part of engineering, which is, a fine and dandy thing to be. I would say that the nice thing about customer obsession, and I think it's useful to think about that way, is when you're making these SLOs and SLIs, thinking about them and creating them from the customer perspective is absolutely like crucial. Like, it's not useful, like the fact that the machines are not up for themselves, they're up for some other purpose. And putting stuff out there that puts the customer first in the way you're measuring things, I think is absolutely crucial. There was a great talk in the Singapore SRECon one from Indeed.com about empathy in SRE, and what they were talking about was, how about if your monitoring systems, in addition to saying this thing is down, said 377,000 people can't use this, or all of Brazil is slow now, right? Stuff like that, or we're losing money at this rate right now because this is down. So there are ways to think about that from a customer obsession. Now, what does it show in the land of Amazon? I have tried to look for the postmortems, which don't exist, from Amazon about this. And my understanding was they were having problems with their auto scaling, but don't take that from me because I don't know any more than anybody else does about that. Good. We have 10 minutes or 5 minutes? Or you're just waving hi. 10 minutes. Okay, good. I think it shows even incredibly smart people with tons of infrastructure can have a bad day. So I think that it's a hard problem what they're trying to do when you have these sort of flash spikes. I know of other places that do that. For example, I think it's PyBay, if I'm getting the name right, or maybe I'm not. There's a company in China that spends large swaths of that company spend their entire day working for the day 11/1. It's basically 11/1. It's the biggest shopping day in China. It is 4 times the size of all of our Black Fridays, that sort of stuff. And so they spend the entire year working on just that. So it's a hard problem. Is the short answer to that question. It's not a reliability. Even the smart people have bad days. Is what I want to say.
I have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
How do you differentiate on-call services with SRE goals?
How to differentiate on-call services with SRE goals? I don't think you do. I think they're intertwined to a certain extent. is, I guess, what I would say. I mean, I think that SRE, like on-call, and I can point you to another really good essay about this, is to a certain extent about like reliability, except it's to a certain extent feeding blood to the machines, right? Where you are putting humans on the line to make sure things up there. I think that humans have a real purpose in these sort of things, and I'd point you to John Alswaw's adaptive capacity lab stuff around resiliency engineering about the use of humans in the system. But I think it's really super important to understand that on-call is, it's being done for a reason. It's an attempt at reliability. I know some people in the field that feel it's a bit of a misguided attempt at this point. I will gladly accept any questions. Yes?
Yeah. In a prior job, I worked with cybersecurity insurance.
Sure.
I'm wondering how you might monetize the downtime risk for like insurance premiums, if you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so the question is, how would you monetize the downtime risk for insurance? And you were saying from a security perspective. I think that's a really super interesting question. Let me tell you why before I try to answer the question by hand waving. But I'm just putting the hand waving off for just a moment. I have wondered a little bit about the connection between security and reliability. Because it is the case that organizations typically say, yeah, okay, Equifax aside, I'm not going to launch a version of this thing if I think there's a security hole in it. And to their credit, I don't think they were thinking that way either. But it is the case that I think that we're used to thinking about security in a different way than reliability as a primary need. And I think that's not. I think that there's a connection there that I'm still trying to make really clearly. So the question is how would you monetize downtime sort of stuff? I believe that there are people in the companies that you're working on who do that for a living, and you ask them. Is a short answer, right? Like that's what they do. They're all about that. Other questions? Yes, sir. Please stand by for the mic.
We have time for 1 or 2 more questions.
Oh, cool. And then I can talk. And then I can talk for. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me do this. I would be glad to talk for hours about this sort of stuff. And you can find me. You can find me in all these places. My only request about the LinkedIn is I typically don't connect to people I don't actually meet, and I don't know. So come say hi. Talk to me, and then I'm happy to connect with you, and then we can talk for hours. Please, sir.
Yeah. So Netflix is very famous for chaos engineering.
Yeah.
So how does that relate to SRE?
So the question was, Netflix really famous for chaos engineering. How does chaos engineering and SRE relate? Chaos engineering, to me, is one of the most interesting things that has happened in my field in the last 10 or 15 years. I really think it's super interesting. It is an attempt to do principled experiments with and around production that would allow you to have the information you need to help you to engineer failure out of the system. So it is highly complementary. Every one of the places on that slide over there, I'm betting, does some version of that, or game days, or Google calls theirs DIRT, which is the disaster and recovery training or something or other. So I think that chaos engineering actually is going to be one of those things that will be just like, yeah, of course we all do that. Like in 5 years' time or less. Like ask me this question in 5 years, and I'll be like, yeah, everybody does it. That's what I think. I think it's going to be a really useful tool in the arsenal of SREs. If it's not already, it will be. That's my prediction.
We have time for one more question.
We have one time.
We started talking.
But I have time for lots of questions, so don't feel bad about that. Don't feel bad. Come talk.
Performance engineering and SRE are related.
So the answer to the question is how performance engineering and SRE are related. The short answer to that question is that when you are trying to ascertain what your SLIs are, what your indicators are, sometimes those are performance indications, right? I get the latency, speed, stuff like that. And so as part of this intersection of performance engineering and reliability engineering is at that point where we're both working towards, you say, this is the performance I expect, and that's what I mean by reliable, then it's my job to work with you to make sure that we stay that way, if that makes sense. Because I think performance is just another aspect of reliability. So, and look, all the people who came in. You missed a great talk, but let me just tell you, come talk to me afterwards. I'm glad. Ask any of these people here. So thank you very much for your time, your attention. Pretty please come talk to me. I'll be here both days, and I really appreciate you being in the room and doing what you do. Thanks a bunch.